He found a German shepherd collapsing in the snow and thought he was saving a life. But when Ethan brought the dog home, strange skills, hidden scars, and a silent chip beneath its fur revealed a truth he was never meant to uncover. Ranger wasn't a stray. He was the last K9 of a secret mission tied to Ethan's brother, Lucas, the one everyone believed had died years ago. And the moment Ranger returned, the men who buried that truth began hunting again. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and the miracles that walk beside us every day. A winter storm pressed hard against the mountains of Winter Hollow, its winds carving icy lines across the deserted road as snowflakes pulsed like white embers in the night. Ethan Miller tightened his grip on the steering wheel, leaning forward slightly as the wipers struggled to clear the windshield. At 34, Ethan carried the build of a man shaped by physical work, broad shoulders, calloused hands, and a face roughened by years outdoors. He had a square jaw softened only by a short, scruffy beard and deep-set hazel eyes that always looked a little tired, as if he'd spent years searching for something he once lost. Those who knew him, though few, would describe him as quiet, polite, and deeply private. The kind of man whose grief, particularly the disappearance of his younger brother Lucas, had stripped away any desire for social noise. Tonight, silence suited him just fine. The dim headlights pushed through the storm, revealing only fractured shapes of snowy pines and the narrow, half-frozen road that curled toward his lonely cabin in the hills. Ethan exhaled slowly, ready to finish the last mile, when a dark figure staggered into the beam of his lights. His boot slammed the brake, the truck fishtailing before catching traction again. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. "What the?" he muttered, leaning forward. The shape didn't move. Ethan stepped out into the cutting wind, his breath turning instantly to mist. As he approached, the form resolved into a dog, a German shepherd barely 10 months old, but already showing the muscular frame the breed was known for. Its coat, a mix of deep brown and black, clung to its body in wet clumps. Snow had gathered across its back and tail, and each breath came out as a trembling puff of white. What struck Ethan most, however, was the dog's posture, low to the ground, legs tense, ears back, not in fear, but in wary readiness. Its amber eyes locked onto him with a sharpness that didn't belong to an ordinary stray. "Easy, boy," Ethan said softly. His voice carried naturally gentle tones, a contrast to his rugged appearance. He slowly lowered himself to one knee, ignoring the sting of frozen air biting his skin. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark. It simply watched him, studying every movement with the intensity of a seasoned survivor. Ethan recognized the look. Lucas once had a dog with the same stare, trained, alert, always calculating. A knot tightened in Ethan's chest at the memory, but he pushed it back. Now wasn't the time. When he extended a hand, the shepherd held still for a heartbeat, then shifted its weight slightly, almost leaning into him as if deciding that trust was its only remaining option. The dog was cold, too cold. Ethan wrapped his arms around its lean body, surprised by the strength hidden beneath its trembling frame. It didn't resist as he carried it to the truck, only pressed closer to his warmth, as though exhaustion had finally won. Inside the cabin of the truck, under the dim yellow glow of the overhead light, the dog lay curled on the passenger seat, eyes half open but never fully letting go of awareness. Ethan placed a hand on its neck, feeling the rapid but steady pulse. "You're lucky I came through," he murmured. The ride home was slow, cautious. The storm thickened, swallowing the road behind them. Several times, Ethan glanced at the dog and found it watching him, not in confusion or fear, but with a strange, almost assessing calm, as if measuring who he was. When they arrived at the cabin, a modest wooden home tucked into a grove of snow-laden pines, Ethan carried the shepherd inside. The warmth hit them like a wave. He set the dog on a thick rug beside the wood stove, then grabbed towels and gently dried its fur. The dog tolerated every touch, stiff but cooperative, its breathing slowly evening out. Up close, Ethan noticed faint scars across its left hind leg, old, healed, but unmistakably purposeful. It also held itself with an odd discipline, turning its head at sounds outside before Ethan himself heard them. "Someone trained you," Ethan said quietly. You're not just any dog, are you?" Once fed and warmed, the shepherd rose shakily and began pacing the edges of the cabin, nose low, eyes sharp, inspecting corners with systematic precision. It checked the back door, then the front window, then paused by the fireplace as if calculating exits. No random sniffs. Every movement had intention. Every reaction was controlled. "Definitely trained," Ethan whispered to himself. The dog eventually returned to him, sitting beside his leg as if reporting that the perimeter was clear. Ethan couldn't help but smile. "Ranger," he said aloud, testing the name that surfaced in his mind. The shepherd's ear twitched, acknowledging the sound. "Yeah, Ranger fits." A crack of wind hit the cabin wall. Ranger lifted his head immediately, muscles tensing. Outside, the storm's howl shifted, just enough for Ethan to raise his eyes. For a brief moment, through the blur of snow against the window, he saw two faint beams of light, headlights, parked at the tree line, then flicker out. Ranger growled softly, low and instinctive. Ethan's skin prickled. Someone had been out there, and they weren't driving away. The chapter closes with Ethan standing at the window, Ranger pressed against his leg, both of them staring into a storm that suddenly felt far more dangerous than the weather alone. The storm eased over the next 2 days, leaving Winter Hollow blanketed in a deep silence that only heavy snow could create. Inside the wooden cabin, Ethan Miller found himself watching Ranger with a sense of growing unease. Not fear, but a slow, tightening realization that the dog he had rescued was far from ordinary. Ranger had regained strength quickly. His coat, now dry and clean, revealed a healthy sheen beneath the scars. He moved with the fluid confidence of a young but capable animal, around 8 to 10 months old enough to have a formed personality, young enough to still be adaptable. Ethan noticed first how Ranger responded to commands he had never taught. When Ethan casually said, "Stay," Ranger froze instantly, body low, ears forward. When he said, "Heel," the dog shifted to Ethan's left side, maintaining perfect alignment. And when Ethan once said, "Search," in a joking tone after losing a glove, Ranger began sweeping the room methodically with his nose, each movement precise, controlled, and utterly unlike the clumsy curiosity of regular pets. Ethan watched this with a tightening in his chest. His late brother Lucas used to joke that some dogs were born to serve, born with instincts sharper than most humans. Lucas would pause, smile, and say, "Sometimes they understand more than we give them credit for." The memory flickered behind Ethan's eyes, accompanied by that familiar ache, like frost biting into old scars. On the third morning, with the sky a pale sheet of winter, Ethan decided to take Ranger for a walk along the clearing behind his cabin. Every crunch of snow underfoot echoed through the quiet forest. Ranger walked slightly ahead, but always kept Ethan on his right peripheral vision, until the first rustle in the distance. Then he shifted automatically to Ethan's left side, positioning himself between Ethan and the sound. Ethan frowned. That wasn't random. That was protection. "Where did you come from?" Ethan murmured. Ranger didn't look back. His amber eyes scanned the tree line, muscles taut beneath his fur. They walked toward town later that afternoon. Winter Hollow was a modest place, weathered wooden houses, a single main street lined with a diner, a hardware store, and an old-fashioned grocery owned by a woman named Margaret Sloan, a widow in her 60s, with silver hair always tied in a bun, and a kind, wrinkled face that seemed carved from years of hard Montana winters. She stood outside her shop, brushing snow from the entryway. "Afternoon, Ethan," she called with a warm smile. She wasn't close to Ethan. They weren't close to anyone, but she always offered him gentle kindness. "And who's this handsome boy?" she asked, leaning a bit to see Ranger. Before Ethan could answer, Ranger stiffened. His entire posture shifted, ears up, tail still, paws planted hard into the snow. Not toward Margaret, but toward the far corner of the street. A black pickup truck was parked there, older model, rust eating at the wheel wells, windows tinted a shade too dark for a harmless citizen vehicle. Ethan had seen it before, twice in the past 2 days, but he had assumed it belonged to someone new in town. Now, with Ranger's hackles rising, he felt cold settle into his stomach. The dog's lips pulled back slightly, exposing the tip of a fang. Not a snarl, but a warning. A trained warning. "Easy," Ethan whispered, placing a hand on Ranger's neck. The fur there bristled beneath his palm like static electricity. The truck's engine rumbled to life. It drove away slowly, too slowly, turning past the diner and disappearing into the swirling snow beyond the hill. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Strangers don't usually stay long this time of year," she commented. "Storms scare them off." Ethan nodded, but his mind was already racing. Back home, while drying Ranger after their walk, Ethan ran his hands behind the dog's neck and felt something raised beneath the skin. He parted the fur and saw it clearly now under the cabin's warm lamplight. A small circle of scar tissue, perfectly round, smooth at the edges. "That's a chip scar," Ethan whispered. Lucas once explained how service dogs were chipped deeper than ordinary pets, the procedure leaving a faint but distinct mark. Ethan's breath faltered. He checked Ranger's paws. There were hardened pads, thick calluses on the outer toes, signs of long-term running on rough, artificial surfaces, not soft forest ground. Training grounds, concrete kennels, repetitive drills. Ethan leaned back on his heels, staring at Ranger as if seeing him for the first time. "Who trained you?" he asked aloud. The dog tilted his head slightly, expression unreadable but attentive, as if trying to decide whether Ethan deserved the truth. Later that evening, while preparing dinner, Ethan dropped his cluster of keys. They hit the wooden floor with a sharp metallic clatter. Ranger reacted instantly, dropping low, head tucked, body aligned like he was bracing for danger. The exact movement Lucas once demonstrated during gunfire simulations. Ethan froze. His pulse tapped quickly against his ribs. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't stray behavior. This was muscle memory. Ranger was a K9, a trained, disciplined one. A dog shaped by commands, danger, repetition, and perhaps something darker. Yet here he was, alone in a snowstorm, underfed, wounded, walking the rural roads of a forgotten Montana town as if fleeing from something he could not fight. Ethan's throat tightened. If Ranger was here, then someone had lost him, or abandoned him, or worse, he was running from them. As the wind howled outside, Ethan knelt beside the dog. Ranger's eyes softened only slightly. Ethan whispered the truth neither fully understood yet. "You didn't just get lost out there. You were escaping." Outside the cabin, past the whispering pines, tire tracks were already being covered by the falling snow. Someone had been watching, and they would come back. The morning broke cold and colorless, the kind of pale Montana winter light that made everything appear washed out, muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan Miller drove through the quiet streets of Winter Hollow with Ranger curled in the back seat, the German Shepherd's sharp amber eyes tracking every passing tree and mailbox as if none of it was unfamiliar, only untrusted. Ethan couldn't stop glancing at him through the rearview mirror. He was worried, not because Ranger seemed sick. On the contrary, the dog looked healthier than when he'd first found him, but because nothing about him matched the life of a stray. A dog shouldn't understand commands he'd never been taught. A dog shouldn't drop into a defensive posture at the sound of keys. A dog shouldn't watch shadows the way Ranger did, like someone who expected danger to step out of them. Ethan turned into the lot of Collins Veterinary and Wildlife Care, a small wooden building with dark green trim and a plaque shaped like a paw print near the entrance. He had known of Dr. Karen Collins for years, though he'd never needed her services before. She had a reputation around the county, not just as a veterinarian, but as a former consultant for working dogs. When Ethan entered, Dr. Collins was wiping down the counter. She looked up, offering a warm but quietly perceptive smile. Karen was in her early 50s with a steady presence and an air of seasoned calm. Her hair, once black, was now streaked with silver and tied in a low knot. Her face held gentle laugh lines at the corners of her brown eyes, but there was something sharper beneath her kindness, an alertness earned from decades handling animals that could read fear better than humans. "Ethan Miller," she said softly, recognition flickering in her gaze. "Haven't seen you in a while. What brings you in?" Ethan stepped aside so she could see Ranger more clearly. "Found him during the storm. Thought I'd better get him checked." Karen crouched a little, letting Ranger come into view. The dog didn't rush forward, didn't sniff her, didn't wag his tail. Instead, he stood still, shoulders squared, placing himself slightly in front of Ethan's leg. Karen's eyebrows rose. "Well now, you're an interesting one." She didn't reach out immediately. She waited, assessing him the way handlers evaluate dogs trained for dangerous work. Ranger's gaze swept the clinic in a clean arc: exam table, cabinet handles, metal trays, the window overlooking the parking lot. Then he looked at Karen, head tilted just enough to signal he was cataloging her intentions. "That's not normal stray behavior," Karen murmured. Ethan felt his throat tighten. "I've noticed." She flicked on a small flashlight and shined it briefly on the floor. A simple test. Ranger tensed instantly, ears up, stance forward, not startled, but ready. Karen nodded very slowly. "I've seen that reflex before. K9 work." Ethan's breath caught. A piece of him had feared this. Another part had already known. Still, hearing it out loud made something cold settle into his chest. Karen stood, motioning toward the exam table. "Let's confirm something." She grabbed a standard microchip scanner, running it over Ranger's neck and shoulder blades. A beep never came. "Nothing?" Ethan asked, half relieved, half confused. "Wait." Karen went to a drawer, pulling out a bulkier, older device. Its casing was scratched, the screen slightly dim, but the design was unmistakably military grade. "This," she said, "was once used for federal canines before the new chips were adopted." She ran it along Ranger's spine. A sharp electronic chirp split the air. Ethan felt his heart drop. Karen stared at the screen. This isn't a pet chip. This is a coded federal ID, and the data—" She pressed a button, then blinked in disbelief. "Has been wiped." Her voice lowered. "That never happens unless someone wanted this dog untraceable." Ranger shifted, brushing lightly against Ethan's leg, as if sensing the tension building between the adults. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's back, though he wasn't sure who he was comforting, Ranger or himself. "What does that mean?" he asked quietly. Karen hesitated. "It means this dog was part of a classified working program, and someone tried to erase evidence of it." She paused, studying Ranger again with deeper gravity. "A few years ago, there was a special canine unit stationed not far from here. Covert work, anti-smuggling, internal investigations, things the public rarely heard about. One of the handlers—" Her voice softened. "His name was Lucas Miller. You might have heard of him." The world tilted. Ethan swallowed hard, voice nearly cracking. "Lucas was my brother." Karen exhaled sharply, truly seeing Ethan for the first time beyond polite familiarity. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I didn't connect the name." She reached for her phone, scrolling through a folder of old photos. After a few seconds, she held up the screen. In the picture, Lucas Miller stood in a training yard wearing a black tactical vest. He looked younger, fit, and impossibly alive. His sandy blonde hair was messier than regulations allowed, and he had the same determined eyes Ethan saw in the mirror every morning. Beside him sat a young German shepherd, alert, ears high, amber eyes shining with intelligence. Ethan didn't breathe. He recognized the posture, the shape of the head, even the subtle stripe of deeper black running along the back. Ranger stared at the photo too, head tilting in faint recognition. "This was Lucas's dog," Karen said quietly. "Part of his team." Ethan felt a heat rising behind his eyes, not from tears, but from the collision of grief and disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. Ranger wasn't just some lost K9, he was Lucas's partner, the one thing Lucas might have trusted more than any human. Before Ethan could speak, Ranger's ears snapped upward. A low growl vibrated through his chest. Karen frowned and turned toward the window. Outside, a dark pickup sat half buried in falling snow, engine running, headlights off. Two silhouettes sat inside, watching the clinic, waiting. A chill slid down Ethan's spine. Ranger growled again, deeper this time. Someone had followed them. Someone who knew exactly who Ranger was, and they weren't leaving. Night settled over Winter Hollow in a still, breathless darkness, the kind that made the forest seem deeper, older, and far more watchful. Ethan Miller paced inside his dimly lit cabin, Dr. Collins's words replaying in his mind like a warning etched into ice. If Ranger belonged to that program, he may have escaped something, and not everyone wants the truth exposed. The reminder clung to his thoughts all evening. Ranger lay near the door, head on his paws, but eyes sharply awake. His ears twitched with every shift of wind across the roof, every groan of settling wood. Ethan had seen animals on edge before, But this was different. This was a soldier anticipating attack. Ethan ran a hand over his own tired face, the rough stubble scraping his palm. His features, once youthful, had hardened over the years from loss and loneliness, especially after Lucas's death. He had grown wary of people, steady with tools, and more comfortable with silence than conversation. But tonight, silence didn't comfort him. It warned him. Around midnight, a faint crunch sounded outside the cabin. Snow compressed beneath footsteps. Ranger shot up instantly, muscles coiled like drawn wire. Ethan froze, every nerve pulling tight. He grabbed the old hunting shotgun mounted above the fireplace, more for bears than people, but it would do. Before Ethan could turn toward the door, Ranger lunged at him, not attacking, but pushing him sideways with a sudden powerful shove. A dark figure burst through the back door, boot connecting with the wood in a violent crack. The intruder moved fast, dressed in black winter gear, face hidden beneath a fleece mask. A gloved hand swung a metal rod toward the spot where Ethan had stood a second before. Ranger's shove had saved him. Ethan hit the floor hard but rolled, raising the shotgun. Ranger leapt with a snarl so sharp it cut through the darkness, teeth flashing as he slammed into the intruder's arm. The man stumbled back, cursing through the mask. A second figure appeared at the doorway, tall, bulky, moving with the heavy confidence of someone used to violence. Ethan cocked the shotgun, fury and fear tightening his chest. "Get out," he warned, voice shaking but strong. The larger man saw Ranger tearing into his partner's sleeve and back toward the exit. "Not worth it," he growled, voice muffled but deep. The smaller man yanked free from Ranger's grip. They fled into the storm, disappearing like shadows swallowed by snow. Ethan locked the door with shaking hands, heart thundering. Ranger pressed close to him, chest rising and falling quickly. Ethan knelt, gripping the dog's fur. "You saved my life," he whispered. Ranger's amber eyes met his with something that looked frighteningly close to understanding. After the adrenaline subsided, Ranger moved to the window, staring into the dark woods. He pawed at the door once, lightly but insistently. Ethan hesitated. "You want me to follow?" Ranger looked back, giving a short, sharp bark, an urgent one. Ethan grabbed a coat, gloves, and a flashlight. He followed Ranger into the night, snow crunching beneath their boots and paws. The shepherd led with purpose, weaving through pines heavy with frost, deeper into the forest behind the cabin. The cold bit at Ethan's cheeks, but Ranger moved with certainty, stopping only at a large, twisted pine with roots half exposed above the snow. Ranger began scraping the ground, pushing snow aside with rapid strokes of his paws. Ethan dropped to his knees beside him, helping clear the area. Beneath the snow was something solid, plastic-wrapped, icy to the touch. Ethan pulled out a rectangular metal box, the edges worn, the hinges rusted slightly. His breath caught in his throat. He peeled away the nylon layer, fingers stinging from the cold. Ranger sat beside him, tail still, gaze locked onto the box as if guarding its contents. Ethan opened it slowly. Inside lay several neatly folded documents protected in plastic sleeves, a small USB drive, and a letter, creased, weather-worn, but legible. His eyes fell on the handwriting. He knew it instantly. Lucas. Ethan's breath trembled. He flicked on the flashlight, holding the letter close. The words were simple but heavy, each sentence pulling another thread from the tightly wound knot in his chest. Lucas wrote about a corruption buried inside the K9 program, an internal group smuggling weapons and encrypted data under the guise of federal operations. Ranger, fitted with a recording device during training runs, had captured something he never should have witnessed. Lucas had found out, and for that, they silenced him. Ethan clenched the paper until it crumpled. The forest seemed to close in around him, the cold sinking into bone. Ranger leaned forward, nudging Ethan's arm, as if urging him to keep reading. The final lines shattered him. Lucas had asked a trusted colleague to release Ranger before he disappeared. "If anything happens to me, he'll find Ethan. He always trusted good men." Ethan's shoulders shook. Ranger pressed his face into Ethan's chest, a gesture so gentle it nearly broke him. The sound of an engine roared in the distance, then headlights swept through the trees, cutting white arcs across the snow. Ethan's heart kicked into panic. They had been followed. "Run," he whispered. Ranger didn't hesitate. The dog bolted forward, Ethan right behind him, clutching the metal box. Snow exploded beneath their feet as they fled into the woods while the truck's doors slammed and voices shouted behind them. The hunt had begun, and this time, Ethan knew he wasn't just running for himself. He was running for Lucas, and for the truth Ranger had carried alone through the bitter wind. The abandoned freight warehouse near the old Winter Hollow rail line looked like a skeleton frozen in ice. Its corrugated metal walls creaked in the wind, and the snow piling along its base made it seem half buried, as if winter itself wanted to erase the place from memory. Ethan Miller crouched behind a stack of rusted crates, his breath sharp and ragged in the frigid air. He clutched a rusted metal tool, knuckles white with tension. His face, usually calm and distant, now bore lines of fear, determination, and grief, all woven together like cracks in old stone. Ethan had rigged the warehouse hours earlier with the only tricks he knew: loose wires, cut breaker switches, a chain suspended from the ceiling to crash loudly when disturbed. He wasn't a soldier, but he had grown up solving problems with his hands, a man shaped by engines and machinery. Tonight, those skills were all he had. Ranger crouched beside him, the young German shepherd's coat dusted with snow, one ear nicked from an earlier scrape, breathing steady but eyes burning with a fierce, unwavering purpose. Even injured, he held himself like a trained sentinel. His amber eyes darted toward the warehouse entrance, muscles bunching under his fur. He was ready, even if Ethan wasn't. The sound of boots crunching over icy gravel cut through the stillness. 3 men entered, heavy coats, weapons drawn, footsteps confident. Leading them was Commander Harris Locke, a tall man in his late 40s with a face carved in harsh lines. His once handsome features were sharpened by ambition and hardened by cruelty. Locke had the iron gray hair clipped tight, a trimmed beard framing a mouth permanently set in a grim line. His eyes, cold blue, almost metallic, held the detached focus of someone who had ordered violence far too often. Locke had been Lucas Miller's superior officer, and now Ethan understood the truth. He had also been his executioner. "Spread out," Locke ordered, his voice low and gravelly, shaped by years barking commands. "The dog and the man are both here. We end this tonight." Ethan pressed a palm against the cold metal of the crate, trying to steady himself. His pulse hammered. He thought of Lucas, his younger brother, blonde-haired and wide-smiled, always wanting to protect others, even when it cost him. The idea that Locke had betrayed Lucas made something inside Ethan fracture and burn. Ranger sensed Ethan's rising turmoil and nudged him softly, his breath warm against Ethan's wrist. The gesture steadied him more than words ever could. When the first of Locke's men stepped onto the tripwire, the chain dropped from the rafters with a deafening clang. The warehouse plunged into darkness as Ethan pulled the main breaker he had rigged earlier. Confusion erupted, flashlights darted wildly. Locke cursed. Ranger sprang forward like lightning, his paws silent on the concrete. Ethan heard a yelp, not Ranger's, but a man's, followed by the clatter of a weapon. Hitting the floor, Ranger had struck precisely, grabbing the gun hand and dragging the man down with trained efficiency. "Find the dog," Locke barked. Ethan moved along the shadows, adrenaline and fear blurring together. He could see the silhouettes of the men moving, but Ranger moved faster, darting between crates, nipping ankles, knocking weapons aside, protecting Ethan with every breath. A shot rang out. Ethan flinched. Ranger skidded across the floor, one leg buckling. Ethan's heart dropped as he rushed forward. "Ranger!" The shepherd rose again, limping, but still pushing himself in front of Ethan, teeth bared. Even injured, he refused to fall back. Locke stepped forward, gun raised, face twisted with fury. "You should have stayed out of this, Miller. Your brother didn't know when to quit either." The words hit Ethan like a blade. The grief he'd buried, the guilt, the questions, surged upward. "Lucas trusted you," Ethan said, voice shaking. "He believed in what you were doing." "He was naive," Locke spat, "and he saw something he shouldn't have." Rage and sorrow collided in Ethan's chest. Ranger snarled, but Ethan placed a hand on the dog's back. "No." Ethan lifted the metal box containing the evidence, USB, documents, Lucas's letter. Locke's eyes widened. "You don't want to do this." Ethan steadied his breath. "I'm done letting fear bury the truth. Lucas deserves justice. Locke stepped forward, but sirens cut through the night, a wailing cry rising over the storm. Federal agents swarmed the warehouse doors, weapons drawn. Locke spun, but he was surrounded. Ranger barked sharply, triumphant even through pain. Ethan sagged with relief as Locke was dragged away, shouting curses swallowed by the wind. Hours later, under calmer skies, Ethan and Ranger stood outside a federal outpost for final processing. A clean-cut officer approached, a kind-faced man in his 30s named Agent Donovan Pierce, wearing a navy cold-weather coat and a neatly trimmed beard. He had gentle blue eyes that softened when he looked at Ranger. "He's a good dog," Pierce said. "We can take him back into the K-9 program if you want. He still qualifies." Ranger sat obediently as a handler clipped a leash to his collar. But the moment the clasp clicked, Ranger turned, tugged hard, and broke free with a jerk of practiced agility. He trotted straight to Ethan and sat at his feet, lifting his gaze upward, warm, loyal, unwavering. Pierce exhaled slowly. "Well, looks like he's made his decision." His smile held a humble understanding. "He's earned his rest, and you've earned him." Ethan knelt beside Ranger, fingers sinking into the dog's fur. "Ready to go home?" Ranger pressed his forehead into Ethan's chest. Back at the cabin, the storm had softened into a gentle snowfall. The fire glowed warmly, throwing amber light across the walls. On the shelf sat a framed photo, Lucas, laughing, hand resting proudly on a young Ranger's head. Ethan settled into his worn armchair, book in hand. Ranger curled at his feet, resting his head across Ethan's boot, ears flicking at each whisper of wind outside. Ethan brushed a soft hand across Ranger's neck. "Thank you, Lucas," he murmured. "Thank you, Ranger. Winter doesn't feel so lonely anymore." Outside, the snow fell quietly. Inside, at last, there was warmth. In the quiet glow of that winter cabin, where one man and one loyal dog finally found peace, we are reminded of something deeper, something many of us forget in the noise of our everyday lives. Sometimes God sends miracles in ways we never expect, not through thunder or fire, but through a wounded dog on a snowy road, through a letter left behind by a brother, through the courage to choose mercy over vengeance. And maybe that is the message for all of us, that even in the coldest chapters of our lives, God still works in the shadows, guiding, protecting, stitching broken stories back together one step at a time. We are never as alone as we think, and the bond between Ethan and Ranger is proof that grace still walks beside us, sometimes on four legs, sometimes through memories of those we've lost, and always through the quiet strength God places in our hearts. As you go back to your own life, your own battles, your own winters, may this story remind you that healing can begin in the smallest moments. A choice to forgive, a chance to listen, a simple act of kindness that can change everything. And may God bless you, your home, and everyone you love, just as he blessed Ethan and Ranger with a miracle on a cold Montana night. Before you leave, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Share this story if you believe God still works through ordinary people and ordinary creatures, and if you want more stories of faith, courage, and the quiet miracles that still move among us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let his light guide you through every season of your life. May God watch over you tonight and every night. Amen.